the Occupy movement in Kalamazoo and more broadly. And I thank you for all you're doing. And I'll try to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing and the principles that I try to follow in what I do and how they might apply to what you're doing. Basically, I want to talk about Mohandas Gandhi, whose principles and whose practice I try to follow to the extent that I can. And I'm no Gandhi, believe me. I respect what he did. I can't do that. But I can, to some extent, try to live the principles that I think he lived by. And they were nonviolent principles extended just as far as he and his followers possibly could. I am a Quaker. I work with the International Quaker Environmental Organization, Quaker Earth Care Witness. I'm its past presiding clerk. I'm now on its steering committee still, or again, rather. I am one of the organizers, the founding organizers of the Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War. I've been doing peace activism, peace demonstrations, vigils, sit-ins since the time of the Vietnam War. I am a member of Veterans for Peace, and I am a U.S. Army veteran. And it was the U.S. Army and my service there in military intelligence, which believe me is a contradiction in terms, that made a pacifist of me, and eventually a Quaker. So that's a little bit of my history. I am in my 80th year. I will turn 80 years old this year, and it occurs to me from time to time that my lifetime encompasses most of the damage that our civilization has done to the planet. Not all of it, but a very good part of it. And it occurred to me the other day that if you put together two of my lifetimes here back before the Civil War, back 160 years, back in the 1850s, and that my grandmother, whom I knew, we shared a few years together, was born well before the Civil War. So my lifetime and those of my immediate family encompass a whole lot of violence, a lot of warfare, a lot of genocide, a lot of killing, a lot of what they call collateral damage to civilians, to infrastructure, to all the creatures of the earth. Because there is not a war that does not cause collateral damage to the whole planet and all the species of the planet. And I am conscious always that we are in the midst of the sixth great mass extinction of species, and that's what I mainly concern myself with these days, is trying to save biodiversity as much as possible from the onslaught, this kind of slow motion tsunami that is overtaking us, of a fossil fuel economy that increasingly is drawing on resources very difficult to get to and very destructive environmentally. And climate change, which we are all involved in, we are all victims of it, we are all, to one extent or another, perpetrators of it. So I'm conscious of what Quakers call bearing witness to all of that. And what does it mean to bear witness? Well, you start by bearing witness to what you know is the destructive process going on around you. Staying aware of that. Staying aware of it within you. Yourself, or your extended self, that is involved with and very much a part of it. And then you bear witness to whatever you can do to call attention to that and to try to do whatever you can to mitigate it, to restore what we are losing, to protect what we are losing, our skills, our youth, our young people, our children. We live in a way in what I have to call a culture of death. We are in the process of killing the future. We're killing it with resource wars, the mining of resources, the poisoning of the earth, the soil, the air, the water. Sending our youth to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to wars and military outposts all over the planet. And bringing them back, to some extent, damaged or in a coffin. And we're causing immense damage to the future generations right here and everywhere else. It is the children and the poor who will mainly suffer from the damage, from the destruction, from what I have to call, in all of its various manifestations, the most destructive war we are engaged upon, and that's the war on nature. All of our wars are in part a war on nature. And the war on nature is part of our culture, our civilization. When Gandhi was asked by a reporter in London as he disembarked from his ship that carried him from India, and he was asked, and it was a provocative question because the reporter knew the answer to the question. Gandhi's main manifesto, Hind Swaraj, Indian Home Rule, was an attack on civilization, on European civilization as such. And the reporter was asking him a provocative question that he hoped would get a headline answer. Mr. Gandhi, what is your opinion of European civilization? And Gandhi's quick response was, I think it would be a good idea. And I think that kind of sums it up. Civilization would be a good idea, and it's up to us to reinvent the culture. One of those posters out there says, time to reinvent. And I think that's what you're doing. And I admire what you're doing. And I hope that it is a nonviolent enterprise, a confrontational enterprise, an enterprise that bears witness to what we are all, to some extent, collaborators in. Bearing witness to that and bearing witness to what we can do. Whatever we can do. Whatever we can communicate. Whatever community we can form. And Gandhi, I think, was all about community. And I'll try to elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that, and what kind of community he really thought would work. I was very pleased to see that although Occupy in its first months really had nothing to say about the environment and climate change, that recently the General Assembly has declared, we are at a dangerous tipping point in history. The destruction of our planet and climate change are almost at a point of no return. That's the Occupy General Assembly. And the call is out for a month of direct action, March 24th to April 22nd. Earth Day. 99 for Earth, 99% spring. Lots of organizations, including 350.org, participating in that. Nonviolence training going on in Kalamazoo during the month of April leading up to Earth Day. A lot of very encouraging things going on. And I take courage from all of those. And I take hope from all of those. But I think, finally, all politics is local, all action is local, all community finally is local. And I'll try to explain how that connects with Gandhi. The war on nature is pretty much a war on ourselves, finally. A war on the self. Gandhi, towards the end of his life, felt he had failed. Yes. He had been instrumental in bringing about the independence of India and of Pakistan, and then ultimately the change of part of Pakistan into Bangladesh, all that complex in there. He was instrumental in bringing about its independence from the British Empire, an end to imperial domination, an end to imperial violence, but not an end to violence. The independence of India and the splitting of India into India and Pakistan led to immense violence, and Gandhi was a witness to the beginning and some of the worst of that violence, and he thought, oh my God, what have I done? What? They don't understand. And he wouldn't understand, I think, nor would he agree with a lot of what's going on in India today, which has adopted the old Western civilization, industrialized civilization, centralized civilization, consumer civilization that he was trying to move beyond, transform, reinvent. Well, did he succeed or fail? I think he succeeded. His heritage is very much with us. He invented all kinds of things. He invented the burning of identity cards, and there would not have been burning of draft cards in my time during the Vietnam War. In quite the same way, it might have happened, but it would not have happened in quite the same way if he had not invented the burning of identity cards in South Africa in 1906. At the Empire Theater on 9/11, 1906. And if you want to remember a 9/11, remember that one. 9/11, 1906. Gandhi's address to the assembled coolies, the laborers, the indentured servants from India, and colored people who had no status. They were, to the British, to the Boers, they were coolies. That's what they were called. And Gandhi was in a continual process of reinventing himself as he began to identify with them more and more, to identify with the poor, to identify with the outcast, C-A-S-T and C-A-S-T-E. As he more and more identified himself and his life and his being with them. And it started on 9/11, 1906, really, when he addressed them in shirt and tie and his costume as a lawyer, the first Indian lawyer in South Africa. A man who had been brought up in a privileged caste, a privileged household, an affluent household in India, but who, because of his color, was denied permission to sit in a first-class carriage on the train and forcibly ejected and called coolie. And that was a change. That really changed his life. Oh, I'm not who I thought I was. I'm somebody else. And they're trying to define who I am. And I'm not going to let that happen. He was a very determined man. And he changed the world. And in a sense, it began in that moment when somebody threw him off a train because he was in the wrong place, and he was a coolie, regardless of his profession, regardless of his education, regardless of his caste, regardless of his status. He was still in South Africa, a coolie. And gradually that necktie comes off, and that three-piece suit comes off, and he starts wearing the costume of the outcasts, and the simple costume of the peasants, the people who live on the land, and the costume of the untouchables, the lowest of the low. And to the end of his life, Gandhi didn't really want to cooperate with those who wanted to use him, who wanted to use the image that he had become, the symbol that he had become, the power that his very presence gave to them. They wanted to use that, and Gandhi wasn't always very cooperative. They were planning some big kind of event, and he'd go where the untouchables were cordoned off in their own place, and he'd go in there and he'd sit down and start embracing them and start talking with them. And his handlers would be coming around saying, hey, you're supposed to be over here talking to the people of power. These are the people of power. These are the people I need to be with. And eventually he'd get around. But this was a man who lived by very important principles and who had an immense influence, and who virtually sometimes made it impossible for the politicians not to go along with him. And Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement used some of the same kinds of tactics, and eventually the Democratic Party had to say, we know it's going to lose us the South, but we're going to have to go along with the civil rights program and civil rights legislation and civil rights action. We're going to have to. We have no choice, even though it is in a way politically very bad for us. They knew it. It did lose them the South. Still, they're not going to get it back. Not in the rest of my lifetime. So, part of Gandhi's strategy was to make things inconvenient for people. Making things inconvenient and presenting them with dilemmas. Two choices that, as far as they were concerned, both of which were bad. But they had to make a choice. And as often as not, they would have to make the choice that Gandhi presented them with, and that he continued and persisted with. Martin Luther King, civil rights action, civil rights movement, would not have been the same had Gandhi not shown the way. The Eastern European undermining of the Soviet Empire would not have been the same. Václav Havel, one of its architects, one of its leaders, would not have been the same person without Gandhi. There's a tradition that goes back to Gandhi in South Africa in the early years of the 20th century, and it comes forward to a Gandhian like Vandana Shiva. Maybe some of you heard when she was in Kalamazoo a couple of years ago, brought in by the students. Follower of Gandhi. And taking Gandhian principles and applying them to industrial agriculture and trying to reinvent agriculture and food systems. You heard a little bit about food and food systems and kind of doing some of your own food rather than taking this industrial junk that is mostly what's in the supermarkets. That's part of what Gandhi stood for, that kind of action, that kind of localization, that kind of reskilling. And reskilling is an important word these days. I work with Transition Van Buren Allegan, which is one of about 115 transition initiatives in the United States and maybe 400 worldwide, 400 or 500. And I'll be visiting the hometown of the transition movement, Totnes in Devon, England, this summer. And reskilling is an important part of our work, getting back to those skills that we've lost, that we've delegated to others, to industrial processes. How do we relearn those things? How to do for ourselves? Went to a reskilling festival in Ann Arbor that was sponsored by Transition Ann Arbor, and there were 57 workshops there. And I went to one about mending my own clothes, and one about getting the palm oil out of Girl Scout cookies, presented by 2 young Girl Scouts who just won the United Nations Forest Heroes Award for North America for their work trying to get palm oil out of Girl Scout cookies. And they're doing it. And little things like that do make a difference, not a whole hell of a lot of difference, but they do make a difference, and they make a symbolic difference. And Gandhi was very clear about symbols and the importance of symbols and what kinds of symbols we need in order to reinvent the way we do things. For Gandhi, the important symbol was the spinning wheel. And I cherish a little talisman on my keychain. It's Gandhi on one side and the spinning wheel on the other. It reminds me of some things. But Gandhi said, no, we're not going to take this industrialized cloth from Great Britain that's made at the expense of the workers in Great Britain, in the mills, the satanic mills of the north of England and the south of Scotland. We're not going to take that anymore. We're going to spin and weave our own cloth and our own clothes. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to do it locally. We're going to do it in the home. We're going to do it in the neighborhood. We're going to do it in the village. And yeah, this is part of the Gandhi industry that is now pervasive in India, and you know, you can buy Gandhi dolls, you can buy Gandhi's little statuettes, all this kind of mass-produced stuff, and this is part of it. But I cherish it partly because it was given to me by a woman who actually was blessed by Gandhi when she was 9 years old. She gave him a glass of juice in her household in Gujarat, which is Gandhi's home state. And he, this smiling old man, put his hand on her head and blessed her. So she came to a presentation I was doing about Gandhi because she wanted to hear. But I think really she wanted to tell about meeting Gandhi and being blessed by Gandhi. And then afterwards she sent me this. So I cherish that partly because of Gandhi, but mostly because of that woman who was blessed by Gandhi. A lovely woman. The tradition. Gandhi, South Africa, India, Martin Luther King, civil rights, Václav Havel, Eastern Europe and Glasnost, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the breakup of the Soviet Empire, at least in some ways. And it was Havel who said, and I think he is maybe channeling Gandhi a little bit on this, who said, the struggle must never be half-hearted, never trap itself in political tactics, never trap itself in speculating on the outcome of its actions, or entertaining fantasies about the future. We need, says Gandhi, to bear witness to the truth. That which is. And a lot of it's bad news. And you need to bear witness to that. Always bear witness to the truth. But Gandhi, for Gandhi, as I suggested, the truth did keep changing. Because he came to India, or to South Africa, as a lawyer, dressed in a business suit, looking very, very dignified and rather stiff and important. And by the time he was into his campaign in India, this was a changed, transformed man. And he was never really concerned about being inconsistent, about changing. People would ask him, well, you said this over here, and then later you said this over here, and those don't seem consistent with each other. And Gandhi would say, truth evolves. Well, what should I believe? Believe the last thing I said. That was always his response. Believe the last thing I said. That would be more closer approach to the truth. But you're never there. It's always receding. It's always changing. You're always changing. Don't get rigid. Don't get attached to a particular outcome. Don't get attached to a particular program. Don't fantasize about what the future is going to bring. You do what you can do. You bear witness to the truth as you and your community perceive it. And that's important for Quakers. In the standard history of American socialism, Quakers are called consistently, without much explanation, Christian anarchists, which simply means Christians who believe in organization from the bottom up. Not disorganization, but organization from the bottom up, where everybody is a participant, everybody presumably is pretty equal, and it doesn't matter whether you're a ditch digger or a lawyer or what. Your say is just as good, and what you have to offer is just as important. What is a symbol that unites us? For Gandhi, it was the charkha, the spinning wheel. It was a complete symbol in that it not only symbolized village culture and a return to village culture, a return to localization, a return to the indigenous culture of India as opposed to something, an economy and a culture imposed by the Raj, the British Empire. It symbolized all that. And it was in itself a freeing from all that, because you made the thing that freed you from that. Yeah, it created unemployment in Britain. Every change loses somebody's job. Right? We keep hearing that. It does. It happens. That's reality. You don't change without somebody losing a job. In the fossil fuel industry, in the clothing industry, whatever. Gandhi said, I'm going up north and I'm going to talk to the workers in those mills and I'm going to explain to them why they're losing work, why they're losing jobs. I've got to do that. They've got to know. They've got to hear from me. And he said, no, you're just asking for... No! They might lynch you. You don't know what's going to happen up there. Gandhi said, doesn't matter. I must bear witness to the truth. I must tell them the truth. I must tell them why I am doing what I'm doing, and why we are doing what we're doing, and how, yes, I am aware it's injuring you. but I have to do it. That's my truth. I was very moved by a story that the woman told me who gave me this token. After Gandhi's death, her very privileged, very affluent family with a 15-room house in Ahmedabad hid Muslims during riots and the killings, real slaughter after independence. But she said, you know, they weren't really risking a whole lot by that. Nobody was going to come into that 15-room elegant house looking for Muslims. So what I really admire is the women over in the Punjab, where the Muslims were in a majority, actually, and the Hindus were a minority. And so what I really admire is the women in one-room houses who would take in Muslims who were fleeing from a mob, and they'd hide them under the altar to the Hindu god. And when the mob came to the door and said, "You hiding any Muslims? Are there Muslims in here?" The women stood in the doors of one-room houses, very poor, and said, "Yes. And you may come in and get them, but you have to kill me first." And they would go away. They almost always went away. So that would be Gandhi. That would be a Gandhian principle. You bear witness to the truth. You tell the truth. It may be inconvenient to tell the truth. It may be inconvenient to say, yes, I'm hiding Muslims. Of course I'm hiding Muslims. Why wouldn't I hide? Why wouldn't I want them not to be killed? And of course, the same thing was going on in other places where Hindus were fugitive. I really admire that commitment to the truth. What's our symbol? Not the charcoal. For Vandana Shiva, it's the seed. Seed is her symbol of opposition to Monsanto and industrial agriculture, and the patenting of genetic material. Plant material, the plant privatization of what should be a commons, the commodification of it, the patenting of it, the owning of it by the corporation. You know, my symbol, says Vandana Shiva, is the seed. And Gandhi in 1906 gives us the image for that. The means to reinvent, the means to change, the means to occupy. The means may be likened to a seed, the end to a tree. And there is just the same inviolable connection between the means and the end. If you want the end, you're going to have to employ the true means, the truth, the seed, which contains the potential of the tree. Almost unimaginable, but it's there. So you have to keep hold of the seed. The connection between the means and the end, as there is between the seed and the tree, And he always thought that the seed is in the self. It's always in the self. That's where the seed is. The seed is the self. So for Gandhi, it was the spinning wheel. For Occupy, it's Wall Street. And I think that works up to a point. But it's not quite the same thing as Gandhi's spinning wheel. It's not quite the same thing as Vandana Shiva's seed. It's a symbol of the problem, but it's not a symbol of the solution. And a full, true symbol is always both. Always both. That's why I'm kind of intrigued by the Occupy Our Homes movement. Because I think that's really a true symbol. It's not only a symbol of the problem, it is a solution. Maybe a partial one and a temporary one, but it is both. You're returning, reoccupying, re-inhabiting that which was foreclosed, that which was taken over by the economy, by Wall Street at large. So that begins to become a Gandhian symbol. I think that in reinventing, one thing that we need to do is to find those kinds of symbols. And they're very powerful. I think Occupy Wall Street has been a powerful thing. Stopping the pipeline, which brought together some Occupy people and some environmental350.org people. That's important. Those kinds of symbols which begin to pull together various communities into some kind of larger community. Those symbols are important too. But it's not really a permanent symbol. It doesn't quite carry, even now it's starting to kind of dissipate as a symbol, as a war cry or a movement image. So I want to talk that much by way of sort of introduction. Now I'm going to get into some terms, and rather than try to spell some Sanskrit words for you, I'm going to pass those along to a handout that will enable you to catch a little bit of what I'm saying. Not that one. I think I've got enough to go around. First notion I think that Gandhi always subscribed to was ahimsa. And usually it's translated as non-violence. I have for years thought of myself as a peace activist. I think now I tend to think of myself more as non-violence activist. And one of my projects always is to try to expand that notion of non-violence, to get past, the collateral damage we're doing to civilians, to human beings, to human cultures, get past that to a way of non-violence towards the whole of the creation, which is going to require a really kind of radical reinvention of the way we live. But that's what I see. Non-violence is maybe not a very good translation of ahimsa, the Sanskrit or Hindi word. Ahimsa is violence, but ahimsa is not quite the same. In Sanskrit, you don't add the a in front and turn it into a negative, a non-something. What you do is turn it into a positive something, a positive force. Ahimsa is a positive force. It's not a negation of violence. It's not a negative. It's a positive. A kind of positive force that is, as Gandhi saw it, the true force. It is the only true force in life. Gandhi said, ahimsa, that kind of non-violence. Everything else is imposed and, in a sense, unnatural. Everybody have one? His main manifesto, his 1906 manifesto, written while he was still in South Africa, it's called Hind Swaraj. It's just a thin little pamphlet. You can download it on the web if you're interested in it. It doesn't take you very long to read it. Hind Swaraj, it's probably his most important manifesto back there in 1906 when he was still working to try to free the indentured laborers and the underclass in South Africa. Swaraj, Hind Swaraj. Well, Hind is India, as in Hindu. Swaraj is rule or order. So Hind Swaraj is usually translated as Indian home rule. And in a sense, that's what he's talking about. But in a sense, it's really not. Because Swaraj is self-rule. And for Gandhi, that's where it always began, with the self. First, find that seed of nonviolence in yourself, and then begin to express it outwardly and live it. But it all begins with the self. And that's where all true change for Gandhi begins, with the self. But of course, in his view, the self is the cosmos. The self includes all things. We are all mirrors of the universe and its force and its energies and its history. We are all, in some sense, 14 billion years old. So my 80 years just doesn't matter. Everything works in cycles in the natural world. And the most wonderful cycle of all, to me, is the explosions of stars. It took 3 rounds of the explosions of stars to produce all of the higher elements that compose us. And each one of those cycles is about 3.5 billion years. So it took 3 of those cycles for us to be here at all. 3.5 billion year cycles. That's the one that, to me, kind of includes everything. And of course, we are all just stardust, right? Well, stardust. Everything, in fact, is stardust, in a sense. Swadeshi. The next step up from Swaraj. Swadeshi is village culture. And that, to Gandhi, was the root always. The village. For us, who maybe live in big cities or probably the neighborhood, what corresponds to a kind of village in our culture. Swadeshi. And Gandhi's effort was always preserving traditional skills and knowledge and culture, carrying it forward, and restoring it where it was lost, that reskilling effort, which, really the man who was doing the food demonstration and talk, that's part of it. Relocalizing, bringing it home again, bringing the culture home again, rather than this mass industrialized agriculture and globalization. Yeah, there are some things that we need that we can't produce ourselves, or that we can't make ourselves, or that we can't repair ourselves. But most of the things for most of our grandparents and great-grandparents were local. Local produce, local manufacturers, local skills, basic skills. We're losing them. Maybe we've lost them. But we're getting them back. We're really working, and I think one of the efforts of the Occupy movement as it's developing is that kind of reskilling, getting back to basics, getting back to the local. And that was part of Gandhi's notion of nonviolence, of ahimsa. It was always local. For Gandhi, India was not so much a nation as a linking of 700,000 villages, each with its largely self-sufficient economy, food systems, building materials, styles, local arts and crafts, different each place instead of this kind of homogeneity. The last program that we did with my group, Wild Ones, a landscape architect came over from Ann Arbor to talk to us about design, landscape design. He said recently, I was in Taiwan. He said I looked around at the landscaping of the hotel I was in. I could have been in Kalamazoo or Ann Arbor. Exactly the same. I thought I was going to go to this really strange, wonderful, exotic Asian culture. The landscape looked exactly the same as Burger King landscape, or standard conventional home garden. That kind of homogenization, it's part of the culture of death. It's part of the culture of violence. A violence to what is natural to a particular area, to a particular place. It's a destruction of the sense of place, of where we are, and therefore who we are. Swadeshi. For Gandhi, all politics and economics are ultimately local, rooted in small, self-organizing communities. There's been a biological revolution. Gaia, an increasing awareness that the earth is a self-organizing system, as if it were in itself a living thing. Right now, it's self-organizing, and it may be self-organizing us out of existence because we've tipped the balance too far, and it's pushing back. But it will balance. It will do it. And some of us are going to be around, and some of the things that we're losing will still be around, and we need to make sure that our children are not being part or victims of the culture of death, and their children, and the species that we're slowly pushing out. At the rate of, in the time that I will be talking to you, 12 recognizably different species will have vanished from the face of the earth. That's how fast it's happening. Recognizably different, not just subspecies, but recognizably different. That's an estimate, but it's one that I find is pretty standard. Rob Hopkins, the founder of the transition movement, really, I think, says it for me and maybe for us. If we wait for the governments, it'll be too little too late. Yeah, we need to push hard on the governments, but that's not going to do it. not going to do it. There are too many vested interests there and too much money that says, no, we can't do that. If we act as individuals, it's too little. Yeah, I can put up my recycling. Yeah, I can carry a cloth napkin with me rather than using a paper napkin. I do that. I can do all those little things, but yeah, I guess it makes a difference, but not enough. But if we act as communities, says Hopkins, it might just be enough, just in time. And we don't have a whole lot of time. So part of the strength has to be Swadeshi, not just Swaraj, but Swadeshi. And the next one is Sarvadaya. There are all these wonderful S's. They're all S words. You can just remember. 4 S's. Sarvadaya, another term coined by Gandhi from 2 Sanskrit words, sarva, all, and udaya, uplift. If you're going to uplift, if you're going to reinvent, if you're going to change, it's got to include everything, everybody. It's got to be inclusive. You can't just leave out this and leave out that and say, no, those are bad guys. That's bad stuff. Everything has to be included in some sense. When Gandhi's son complained that Gandhi was not giving enough time to his family, which Gandhi didn't, he was guilty in that respect, Gandhi's response was, my family now includes all living beings. And he tried to follow that principle. The social ideal for Gandhi, Sarvadaya, includes equitable distribution of wealth, self-determination at the village level, and the equality of the lawyer with the barber, or the ditch digger, or the construction worker. They all have equality in organization from the bottom up, not from the top down. Including the untouchable, the outcasts, the really poorest of the poor, the despised and the spat upon. And then that term that I think most people are familiar with is a key term for Gandhi, satyagraha, which is usually translated as soul force, as opposed to brute, physical, violent force. Soul force, satyagraha. But literally the term means sat, that which is, or truth, the truth, and graha, firm grasp. That's what you have to have, satyagraha, firm grasp of the truth. And that gives you soul force, the kind of force that ultimately matters. And it didn't matter to Gandhi how many followers he had. He said, I don't have followers, because I'm not a leader, I'm a follower. It doesn't matter if there's just one. It's satyagraha. I have to hold firm to the truth. That's what matters. Not the outcome, but who I am, what I do, how I do it, holding firm grasp to the truth as it comes to me at this time and this place. That's a hard lesson, I think, to learn. It is basic to a lot of Eastern philosophy, to Buddhism, to Vedanta, the idea of non-attachment. You do what you have to do. You undergo a discipline so that you're doing it as best you can. But you're not attached to the result. If you're attached to the result, you're liable to be discouraged because it's not the result that you thought would happen. So you try to detach yourself from that. What matters is Swaraj, self, the Swadeshi, the community, the village, the Sarvodaya, the embrace, and the Satyagraha, holding firm to the truth. That's all part of Gandhian nonviolence. 4 things, 4 levels, if you will, but they're all basically still the same. Only a firm grasp of the truth, that which enables the individual to sustain resistance to injustice. As Gandhi indicated in the title of his autobiography, the story of my experiments with truth. Life was experimental to Gandhi. You try this, if it doesn't work, you try that. But as you explore, as your vision changes and evolves, you have to try as best you can to hold that firm grasp to the truth, which includes the awful truth. The awful truth. But the hope also that every one of you is. And that every one of you together is even more. So both are part of Satyagraha. And we think of Satyagraha maybe as something like the Salt March, Gandhi's Salt March, which was a wonderful Gandhian symbol. The Indians taxed salt, a basic need of human beings, and really all creatures. It's a basic need. And they put a tax on it. And Gandhi said, I am going to make salt. I am going to walk to the sea, and we are going to make salt. We're going to break the law. And it was a law. You can't make salt. It's monopoly, a British imperial colonial monopoly, like the cloth industry. We're going to make cloth. We're going to make salt. And in all of those things, he risked arrest. And he was always, as he saw it, holding firmly to the truth. If he came up before the judge and the judge says, how do you plead? Gandhi would say, guilty. I'm guilty. Okay. Sentence me. And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. But he did spend quite a bit of time in prison. In the course of his lifetime, they were sequestered in one way or another by the government. But like those women who stood in the doorway, he said, well, I broke the law, so according to the law, I'm guilty. I don't know how you feel about that. But that's hard. That's hard. And I remember my days in Berkeley in the 60s, where I was supposedly studying for a PhD, and not getting very much done because every day you walked on campus and you started, the leaflets started coming in. You kind of decided what you were going to do that day, what demonstration you were going to participate in, and all that. It was all anti-Vietnam War, basically. I was, by that time, a teaching assistant, and teaching, of course, on my own, actually, a writing course, a freshman writing course. And one of my students was the leader of the Maoist movement. He didn't very often come to class. He was off demonstrating, he was off sitting in. He was arrested for, I think, criminal trespass in the Sheraton Hotel across the bay in San Francisco, among a large group of people. And one day, when he hadn't been in class for quite a while, he came to my office, which was in a kind of dungeon down in the basement. I was the lowest of the low. I was one of the outcasts. I was one of the untouchables. And he came into the office, and he said, Tom, we're not guilty. The jury said not guilty. And he was just ecstatic. And he says, those ACLU, you liars, they're terrific. They cut us off. They cut us. But this time he was dancing up and down the hall, saying, and we're guilty. We're guilty. But they didn't plead guilty. They pleaded not guilty, and they got off. And that was kind of a triumph. It was. It was a triumph. I have to hand it to them. I have to hand it to those ACLU wives. I have to hand it to those people who were doing the sitting and the demonstration and the press tracks. I admire that. But it wasn't what Gandhi did. He always went up before the judge and said, guilty, sentence me. Put me in prison. And very often he'd go into prison and he would fast. And then they'd have to let him go. But that was his principle. And principle was always important to Gandhi, and change was always important to Gandhi, and I ended this little handout with a couple of what I think is important principles for Gandhi. Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. I think that was important to Gandhi always, that he would go on learning, living, evolving, changing. He had to. No way you can't. And I was perfectly indifferent to the numerical strength of the fighters on our side. That was not important to me. Well, it was, but it wasn't, in a way. What was important was holding to the truth. Bearing witness to that truth, the best truth you can come up with. And finally he says, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and you win. That's optimistic. And Gandhi, for all of his despairs and his conflicts with himself and with his followers and with his, by that time, great entourage that wanted to use him one way or another, he was always an optimist. He was always hopeful. He always kept the faith. Questions, comments?
I have a question. When he would fast, would they let him out of prison because he was going to die? Or would they let him out of prison because his protest was working?
Sometimes one or the other, or both. Sometimes it was just because, by that time he had such a following, and the international press had I remember in my childhood, just before and during World War II, the newsreels, Gandhi's fasting again, or Gandhi's in prison again, on the newsreels in the movie theater. He got international media attention when he went on his fast, or when he was imprisoned again. He was an internationally known figure, and when he did something or said something, or when he showed up in London in his dhoti and his what the British authorities called his loincloth, this half-naked man, he got international film and radio attention. There wasn't television in that time. We went to the movie theater to get the film days.
What do you think was his most effective strategy when he was trying to get India free from Britain? What do you think was, out of the things he did, what do you think was the most effective?
I think it was a combination. I don't think it was any one thing. The Salt March was a very effective demonstration. because by the time he reached the sea, there were tens of thousands of people who were with him everywhere he went. He picked up this vast entourage, and they all, when they arrived at the sea, started, gathering up seawater and evaporating it and making salt. It was a mass protest, a mass demonstration, a mass creative, if you will, demonstration. I think that his creative demonstrations, what he did that really kind of showed imagination on his part, a departure from the norm. That was a positive thing, but also a protest against the system. So that it was both a protest against the system and something actually positive. And people from that time on started making salt. And the British finally had to say, no, what's the point? Take the tax off. The early colonists threw King George's tea in Boston Harbor rather than pay the tax on tea. It's still a famous move, demonstration, the Boston Tea Party. It's been peculiarly taken over by the Tea Party as a peculiar symbol of their movement. But it was a revolutionary movement against tyranny. They think they're carrying it forward. And they seized on a symbol that has some potency. It was a very shrewd move on their part. So, again, I think that what the early colonists did and what Gandhi did has resulted in this very peculiar twist on it by the Tea Party. So anybody can co-opt that kind of thing. You have to be careful. And governments and corporations are very good at co-opting protest. If it's a green protest, we can be greener than you. And so you get, British Petroleum. Oh, we're green. We're really green. But I think that imaginative creation of a symbol I don't see a charismatic leader at the moment, like Gandhi or King or Havel. I'm not sure that's important. What is it that unites you? What is the story that unites you? What is the symbol that unites you? Gandhi told a story. And he published his autobiography in 1924. Fairly early on in the struggle. And he said, I'll tell you the story of my experiments with truth. He was trying to tell a story about himself, about a way of life, a vision, an experimental one. I don't know how it'll turn out. But the objective is always truth. And that was powerful for Gandhi and for the time. And I think it still is. One of his most effective moments in South Africa was when the Transvaal, which was under the control of the Boers, unlike the Cape Colony, which was pretty much under the control of the English, declared that not more than 4 coolies could be in their independent state, and that was not part of a nation at that point. It was a separate state, Transvaal. The Union of South Africa did not come into being until 1910. But in the Transvaal, Gandhi was trying to organize the coolies, the indentured laborers, who had kind of sold themselves into a sort of wage slavery, which a lot of us have done, more or less. So it's kind of sold ourselves to a system. A lot of people have. Maybe you haven't, maybe we haven't, I don't know. When he declared a general strike, and all of a sudden the colonial elite said, hey, where's my waiter? Where's my hotel room cleaner? That kind of day of absence thing, if you've ever seen a black American play, Day of Absence, when all the black people disappear and all the whites are saying, how are we going to get along? Well, that happened, that general strike. It was on the border of the Transvaal. And it would be illegal for more than 4 people to cross that border. 25,000 crossed it all at once. Couldn't deal with it. When 350.org held that big demonstration when they were going to do a month of civil disobedience, 30 or 40 people crossing the lines every day. First 30 or 40 people, they threw them into solitary confinement. They treated them terribly. They gave them shit for food, if anything. Not enough water. Didn't pay any attention to them. Crowded them into cells. They were going to deter this movement, which was supposed to last for a whole month. People crossing the lines illegally for a whole month. No, we're going to stop that right now. We're going to make it so tough. They're not going to do that. Well, 30 or 40 more did it the second day. 30 or 40 more did it the third day. Finally, the jail authorities came to the police and they said, you can't keep sending us 30 or 40 people a day. We cannot handle it. From that point forward, 30 or 40 people booked, released immediately. Never served an hour under temporary detention or under sentence. Because they couldn't handle it. Some of the most effective movements, the civil rights movement, finally succeeded because they couldn't handle it. They thought they could. They thought with the fire hoses and the dogs and the beatings and the killings and the whole thing that it would go away eventually. And it didn't. And they couldn't handle it. They had to do something. And they did. And as I said, they knew it was inconvenient, disadvantageous to do it. They knew it was a problem. It was going to lose in the South. They had to do it. The Civil Rights Act passed. That requires a real kind of determination, a firm grasp to the truth as we see it. And Gandhi is very clear about that. One of the quotations on the back, Satyagraha postulates the conquest of the adversary by suffering in one's own person.